I had some very supportive supervisors early on, back when I was just a lowly analyst, that were very supportive of me and saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that's really important too. And so that's the other value add that I think I bring, is so many people, a lot of the conversations that I have with clients start out as, I have this expertise in my field. They may even be noted authors in that field. They may lecture for a living. Some of them have been noted college professors. But when they're in this forum, it's like, I don't know how to get my arms around my own expertise and deliver it to an audience. And I think a lot of my job is looking for that thing in them that they don't see in themselves for whatever reason. And I can tell you 100% of the time, everyone has that thing.
Welcome to The Path Distilled. I'm Kevin Harris. I'm here with my co-host, Lauren Tashman.
Hi, everybody. Today, I'm really excited for the guest that we have on the show today. I want to introduce everybody to JT Compeau. He is the founder of The Content Interpreter and is a speechwriter and a presentation extraordinaire. So we're going to be hearing all about his story today, and what he does, and his viewpoints on success, failure, and what it takes to be great.
And so, JT, could you start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes. Thanks for having me on the program here, both of you. It's a real honor to join you. So as Lauren said, I'm JT Compeau, and I'm a speechwriter and presentation consultant. I have a company called The Content Interpreter. And I work with thought leaders, C-suite members, and entrepreneurs to help them extract their greatness and share it with audiences. So it's all about elevating content that's already existing, or it's about writing speeches or keynotes or TED Talks from scratch. And I've developed this approach that is very consultative in nature, so that the end product is something that is authentic to them and accessible to audiences. And we could talk a little bit more about that. I'm thrilled to be here.
Sure.
So this is why I was so excited to have you on, JT, because I think that through your story, we can learn about you and your path along this process and how you've evolved, but also what you've seen in others through the people that you have worked with and do work with.
Yes, I'm very excited about this conversation.
So could you tell us when and how you first got involved in doing what you do? And this could be the first time you started working with creating content in general, even if it's before the professional stage. Take us back to the beginning.
Absolutely. So this business and what I'm doing now, I feel, is the convergence of several different paths in my life. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording that I actually did radio as a college student. It was a student-run station, but it competed with stations, professional stations in the market. And we actually won our time slot a time or two, which was always exciting. So I've always had this passion for public speaking and performance, because that's really what it is. I went to the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. And when I left school, I started my career in media research. And I worked for a couple of the big agencies, media agencies, which buy media, buy TV, buy radio, digital, billboard, all of it. And I worked on the research side. So it was really about getting inside the head of the consumer and understanding how that particular consumer, that target audience, relates to different media. So that's like one track there where I am trained to look for the insight that will add value into understanding a target audience. That career then evolved, since it's all about evolution, in my opinion, into working for an ad tech firm and if your listeners aren't familiar, it's digital advertising and the creation of audiences so that you can just buy a target audience for your digital campaign, and it's all done in an automated fashion. I worked for a firm where they used social media to develop those audiences. They use the insights that they got from social media to develop those audiences. And so I directed client services for that firm, and it was all about storytelling because they had a very complicated process. I mean, they showed me the equations one time of all the data science that was behind it, and
The algorithms.
I don't know. I had to go sit down. It was it was really something. But once you get to work with the engineers who developed it and the data scientists who developed it, you realize that, hey, this is a story, and you can break it down into building blocks and explain that to clients. So about halfway through my time there, they said, well, we're going to hire a PR consultant that's going to work on the company's earned media footprint. So getting placed in the major trade magazines, Adweek and Broadcasting and Cable, to name a couple. And do you think that you could write something that the press would be interested in? You're already doing it with clients. Do you think you could do something for the company? And I said, I've never done that before. But I'll give it a shot, because it was a very startup-like company, all hands on deck. Turns out that I was pretty good at that, at knowing what audiences that were reading those trade press publications were interested in, and also representing the company in a way that wasn't overly salesy, but still got our point of view across about different issues in the industry. And that was when all the light bulbs sort of went off for me to develop this business. And so when I parted ways with that company at the end of 2017, I said, well, let's take a shot at using all of the skills in my toolbox that I've put together so far. It's a pretty broad repertoire, but I've gone deep in a few different areas. There's the insight area, there's the client relations area, and then there's the actual writing of content for pretty wide public consumption. And that was how, after a little bit of struggling to find my voice as an entrepreneur, that was how the business came together. So there have been little seeds planted along the way for 10 years or so.
It sounds like you were surprised, if you will, if that's kind of the right wording, trying not to put something in your mouth there. But it sounds like you were surprised that you were able to be good at this, form of writing that you hadn't done before. Yeah. Looking back at it though, can you see some reasons that maybe that wasn't surprising? Or was it truly just like, wow, I am actually good at this?
I think it's not so surprising if you look back at it and try to have some objectivity, which I think is one of the value adds that I bring to my clients, is to be invested enough in their story that I'm really excited about what's happening, what they're doing next, but also having some objectivity that will help you connect the dots. So I guess yes and no. I think I was surprised in the moment that, if I had gotten one placement, right, or if the PR consultant had gotten me one placement, it'd be like, okay, that's great. But the fact that there were so many, and that the earned media footprint was able to develop in that way was pretty exciting. And I guess it was kind of surprising in the moment. But now that you look at it all together, it really does kind of make sense.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just curious, in those early attempts, were you noticing certain things that worked better than others and attempting to continue using that process, or was it hit or miss? Did you have a pattern that you were identifying?
I think writing is always a process, right? Regardless of which kind of writing you're doing. And I think that the approach that helped me early on, pre-content interpreter, was the fact that I was actually responsible for representing something that wasn't my own. I feel like when it's your own, you feel a different sense of responsibility for it versus when it's someone else's. And so a lot of the basic building blocks in those early pieces were about making sure that I was representing and staying true to the company's vision and to the CEO's vision, who, by the way, I would describe in the sense of what he was trying to accomplish in the industry as visionary. So I wanted to be really true to that. And I didn't want to inject too much of myself in that. That's different than when I'm here, for example, talking with you nice folks about my own company. It's also different from when I'm actually working with clients. I had this discussion the other day, actually, with someone that I just completed some work for. And I said, he was talking to me about, well, here's what I think about this and that. And he said, what do you think? And I said, well, I never want to inject myself too much into what you're doing. This is your point of view. I'm just helping you extract that greatness and translating and interpreting that in a way that is appropriate for that forum, et cetera, et cetera. So it's different. It's a different sense of responsibility. And I think that the process is always an evolution. So you have to have some guidelines. And in the early days, the guidelines were, well, this is the vision of the company that was laid out. We don't want to be overly salesy in our approach, because then no one takes you seriously, because then it's just a sales pitch. We want to have really good, really well thought out, very well articulated points of view on issues that were and are still facing the industry. Brand safety is one that comes to mind. It's like, what do you want your advertising to appear alongside? And that's a big issue, especially when you're buying advertising in a way that's completely automated and no human being there's very limited human involvement. So those were the parameters that I think helped guide us to success early on. And I think we were surprised. Yeah, like how wow, that this is something that they want to hear more of. And it wasn't just, oh, well, here's our pitch and do you want to buy it or not? But it was actually articulated very well, those viewpoints.
Thank you.
What my question that's kind of looming, I mean, honestly, you're provoking a lot of interesting questions that I want to ask you, but the question that's been looming ever since you started talking about kind of how you got into this was, even before that, like, what made you want to pursue this in college in the first place?
I have always been fascinated with media. I was one of those kids that would just listen to the radio for hours and hours and really just study how a DJ or an on-air personality would communicate with his or her audience. I thought it was fascinating that it's one person that's in this booth. And when I went on to do it, I really got a sense of what that's like. You're sitting in a booth on your own, and you have to communicate in a way that will reach a very broad swath of people. And so I thought that was fascinating when you juxtapose it with the idea that, and the secret is that you're really only talking to one person, the person that would be most likely to be interested in your station and the kind of music and the advertisers that you have on. So there's this interesting juxtaposition, which I carry forward in my work today, where it's, okay, you have to write a speech and the speaker is going to be speaking to 150 physicians, and there's a lot of technical terms and very procedural type jargon that's in there. But you also have to weave in a story, so that even if and that's the joke I always make with clients, like, if I snuck in the back of the room, even I, the lay person and the dumbest person in the room of all these doctors, should be able to get something from your speech. So that was certainly an early form of inspiration. And then I just heard all the wonderful things about the Newhouse School. And I said, I have to go there. And it was always my first choice school. And I really believe that it changed the trajectory of my life and my career in ways that I could not have foreseen. So that was the inspiration. I really found that to be quite fascinating, that juxtaposition of speaking to one versus speaking to many.
Is there a particular memory from you being a kid that stands out?
That's an interesting question, and one that I was not prepared for. Not that this is scripted.
Dumped
I
ya.
don't want to make that. A memory that stuck out. I don't know. I just remember in general just spending weekends listening to the radio. I'm a big music fan too. Can't play at all. I've done a little bit of singing here and there in my life, but just a big appreciator of music. And having someone come in and offer entertainment news or insights or behind the scenes story with this artist juxtaposed with my favorite artists at that point across all different genres, I could just, and I did spend weekends just listening to that all day long.
Were you taking notes for him? Did you know at that point that you might end up in radio?
Well, the thing is, it's funny, is that I don't really consider it as having been in radio. I think it looks that way to other people. I know people who I went to school with that are still doing it, and they're the ones that are in radio. So I think I should qualify that. I think at the time that I did it, it was an interesting way for me to express myself. I think when you're young and you're first entering college, it's like, well, where are my people? And it just turned out that my people, including some of my best friends, still to this day, were at that station. And so it was a really great bonding experience. And you learn all parts of the business without having the pressure of competing at a very high level. I have personal what they call air checks, which is just recordings of me on the air that I will never let loose out into the public. They're just mine. That make me glad that I did not go into this as a profession, because there are many of my classmates who do it that are way better at it.
I was curious, when you were listening over the weekend, spending that much time, did you think you would make a career or at least study radio at that point in your life? Could you
Definitely in communications, for sure. I knew pretty early on that that's what I was going to do. Radio specifically,
okay, gotcha.
I don't know. I don't think I really had that sense. And especially over the last, I would say, 20 years. So if I think back to the kid that was listening to those radio stations, and you compare it to the way media is consumed now and the way that marketing and advertising have changed as well, I think it's changed so much that I don't know if I could have foreseen how I would apply the skills that I would later acquire in different ways. And if I could, I don't know, I don't want it to sound self-congratulatory, but if I could say that is, if that is one of the more interesting aspects of my career, I'd say that is it. Is like, oh, you have this toolbox, you have this repertoire of skills that are all related to communication one way or another, and look at all the different ways that you can apply them. And when I look at my career to date, I certainly don't see anything that I'm doing as an endpoint. I want to keep growing and keep evolving, of course, and see how many other ways I can apply them.
Thank you.
So it sounds like you mentioned kind of finding your people.
Yeah.
As humans, we're kind of in-groupers, out-groupers, right? And then there's this other layer of that aspect of uniqueness, right? And finding out who you are, even if it's within a group. Did you see yourself at any point being unique or different than the others that you were around?
I think that's a good question too. And I gotta say, I appreciate the focus on these early years. Yeah, I've done other podcasts in the past, and there hasn't been the focus on the early years. So I appreciate the question. Did I think I was different? I think that well, even in that, so I was going to say, I think I looked at it as an art form perhaps more than others, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't even really think I was that unique and in that respect. Trust me, in those years, there was really nothing remarkable about me. So we could just cut to the chase there and just make a blanket statement. But in all seriousness, I think it was just really, again, that that it was an art form that had a lot of depth to it that maybe didn't necessarily appear on the surface. So if you're really good as an on-air personality, whether you're on television or radio or the web or elsewhere, if you're really good at it, it looks effortless. And what I remember is really having to try very hard to make it good. And then, as I said, kind of falling short of when compared to some of my peers. But it did give me a good exposure, I think, into, well, how do you craft that message so that it's balanced and talking to many versus talking to one, but also having a universal appeal, but staying targeted to a particular kind of audience and what they would be interested in. So I think that was very formative for me and understanding, like, well, what does a good communicator really have to do? What boxes does he have to check?
I would imagine that's a huge strength for your clients right now, the fact that you have experienced that, kind of being in the front and doing the work. I remember as a kid, you know, I grew up doing equestrian show jumping, and there were some coaches that didn't ride, you know, and were coaching, and some that still did ride or had very big careers and were still doing that. And we always had this debate of, like, who do you want to be coached by, the person that's still doing it or the person that at least has done it? And, you know, it's kind of that idea, like, to really understand something, you have to have experienced it or be experiencing it. So would you say that's something, kind of a value add that you bring to your clients?
I think so, yeah, and that's really cool. By the way, the equestrian jumping. I want to get back to that, but I don't want to answer the question.
Not my show, your show.
Well, it's your show. So you control the direction however you want. But I do think that's cool. I just want to mention that. I think that's a great analogy, and part of my experience that we didn't even mention is that I've been involved in Toastmasters in various capacities for almost 10 years now. Mm-hmm. And so I have really kind of been on all sides of it, seen what is a good way to communicate on stage versus in an op-ed, and I have been on all different sides of it. So there is a breadth of experience that I bring to clients. And again, it's tough because I have to communicate to them that, yes, you can trust me. I will safeguard your story. I really care about your message. But again, I can't inject too much of myself in it. And I think that's where, frankly, a lot of businesses, maybe not so much today, but in the past, it's like, if you're talking too much about your features, right? Like, well, I can do this and this and this, and look how great I am, and all about me, you're missing a critical point of, like, well, what can I do for you? And so I have to think of creative ways to say, well, this client needs X. This is one of the goals of her speech. What do I have in my toolbox? Again, to make it look kind of effortless so that he or she doesn't know that I'm, you know, I have this tool because I've been with Toastmasters for 10 years and I know that there's a certain way of doing it. You know, it has to have an effortless quality, I think, to it.
And I would like to come back around to a question Lauren asked earlier, and maybe
about
this
the
is
equestrian. Okay, speaking about me. All right.
It would be the part that I think she was kind of getting at. So if we fast forward to this time when you're identifying your skill set at getting the message across, and you had mentioned earlier that you were getting a lot of placements or having success with that. So during that path, when you were looking at developing those skills or recognizing those skills, could you talk a little bit about when you really started recognizing that ability, when you were good at that, and then maybe a little bit on how you cultivated that?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And I did this business would not exist without the help of a wonderful career coach that I met up with in 2017. And it was really fate, I think, because she wasn't introduced to me. It was kind of like just a listing of different career coaches. And there was just something about her and her way and the way that she works with clients that was really appealing to me. And so we had a phone conversation. And I went to her really just to try and I hadn't even thought about starting my own business at this point. It was more of like, well, how do I expand on this momentum that I've had with the second half of my tenure at this ad tech firm? And it was a series of conversations and a lot of work, I think from like April to early December of 2017. And along the way, it was really about discovering what are the values that are most important to you as a communicator and as a business person. And it was really about planting those stakes in the ground, right? So it's about determining what's important to you. So for example, I said, well, whatever I end up doing or whatever skills I end up adding, I want to make sure that it is client focused and client centric and really consultative in nature. Whatever I'm doing, I don't want it to be transactional in the sense that I would just do it and not really get to know that person and their business needs. So that was one thing. The second thing was whatever it is that I do, I want to develop it into some kind of art form, which eventually did happen. And even though I think it's a somewhat simple and straightforward process, I did develop my own process for working with clients in the way that I do now. And so that was really what started to plant the seeds of what this business would become, is just working with someone that cared a great deal, but that was objective enough to see, what might work and what didn't. And I borrow really a page from her book. I'm not a coach. I would never call myself a coach. People sometimes mistakenly call me a public speaking coach, which I am not. And I know some fabulous public speaking coaches if anyone's interested in a referral, but that is not me. But I do kind of borrow from the coach's playbook in that sense, that I really wanted to be client centric. So that 8-month or 7 or 8 month period was really crucial towards helping me steer the business in the direction that I wanted it to go.
It sounds like the way you talked about your time at the ad firm and that opportunity you got there, it sounds like being client focused was very important to you even then.
Oh, absolutely. And it always has been, really. I think that you just have to, especially in the media ad business, you have to rise to a certain level so that you can be more face to face. But that I always felt from the very first day was a direction that I was headed in. I had some very supportive supervisors early on, back when I was just a lowly analyst, that were very supportive of me and saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that's really important too. And so that's the other value add that I think I bring, is so many people, a lot of the conversations that I have with clients start out as, I have this expertise in my field. They may even be noted authors in that field. They may lecture for a living. Some of them have been noted college professors. But when they're in this forum, it's like, I don't know how to get my arms around my own expertise and deliver it to an audience. And I think a lot of my job is looking for that thing in them that they don't see in themselves for whatever reason. And I can tell you 100% of the time, everyone has that thing, because if you are special enough to be invited, you definitely have something in your personal story, in your professional life, that is appealing to broad and targeted audiences.
And when your mentors or your coaches, for lack of a better word at that point, when they first pointed out what you were capable of or saw something in you, did you believe them at the time?
No, I probably still don't believe them now, to be honest with you. But that's the thing, right? Is that is why it is so important to be client centric. And I would put this out there as a lesson for any business person, that if you're really looking to up your client relations game, it is about looking, seeing beyond yourself, right? And looking for what they really need and trying to find that something special, because chances are they don't really see it. Or if they're coming to you and saying, this is what I need, I think it always behooves you as a business person to look beyond that and try to add value wherever you can, but in a way that is relevant to them. And the only way you can get there is by really listening. So no, I probably didn't see it in myself. I still don't. People tell me a lot that like, oh, that's really cool what you do, and I could never do that. And I'm always thinking like, well, so much of it is me just listening. Like, how could you not do that? But I guess that it's a skill unto itself.
Yes, we're not born effective communicators, unfortunately, including listening skills.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was a defining moment, if you will, kind of getting that feedback. I mean, I know we asked you to share an image that resonates, right, from your kind of path and story, and that was what you shared. Tell us a little bit more about that picture that you shared with us, and I will actually, as you're doing that, pull it up on our screen.
You're going to show it. Awesome. So I just want to preface this. There's a neat little story that goes behind this. It's a piece of paper, and it comes from an official Toastmasters ballot. So after you go up and speak, people can write little handwritten notes to you and give you feedback or constructive criticism on like, hey, I really enjoyed this, and this could have been better for me. And I don't remember what the topic was. This must have been, I think, 8 or 9 years ago that I gave this speech, and someone that has gone on to be a mentor for me at different isolated periods in my career, particularly through a rough patch of mine in the mid 2010s or so, gave this piece of paper to me, and it said gifted storyteller. And that was all it said. And I knew it was from her because she handed it to me personally. And so she wanted me to know that it came from her, but there's no identification on it. That's all it says. So I think that this is special for a couple of reasons. I think it is a tangible manifestation of my philosophy in working with clients. And no, I don't think I'm a gifted storyteller. That's not why I'm bringing this up. I think the reason why it's special is that it exemplifies that idea that, hey, someone can see something in you that you don't see in yourself. And even if it is just for that one speech, which, if I would rank myself on public speakers or folks, I'm pretty good, but there are folks that are way better than me. I don't think of myself as gifted, but in that moment, I must have presented some kind of insight that really spoke to her and did it in a way that was special and related to her experience. And so that is something that I always bring up to folks that might be in doubt about their own abilities.
It's also of interest to us given the word gifted, right? So Kevin and I met and both come from the background of exploring expert performance, expertise, and that whole long run debate of nature versus nurture and
Sure.
what people believe, right? And gifted is always something that's used on the nature side of things, the belief that you are maybe born with something or born to be something. What's your stance on that?
I think I actually, and I'm going to nerd out for a second. Actually,
You're among fellow nerds, so go ahead.
I really would like to hear more about your research on that. But I think where my stance is on it is that I was looking through my Facebook, and I follow Seal, the musician, on Facebook. I've seen him in concert 3 times, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's one of my favorites. And I don't know if this is his quote or someone else's, so I apologize if it's not actually his. But he said something along the lines of, and it was just today, something along the lines of hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I think that's right. I think that's what it said. And so I think that you can be very gifted, but if you're not applying it, it doesn't really do a whole lot of good. And if you're not working to actively hone that skill set, not that everything is a competition, but that people will surpass you, or you won't be able to do it in the way that you really want to because you're not working hard enough at it. So I do think it's a balance. It's like a scale between nature and nurture. I do think that some people just are naturally gifted at whatever it might be, but as they say, even Tiger Woods needs a swing coach, right? So if he's not out there working hard every day, and in particular when he was coming up as a child, and you read the stories about how his father was a big influence, if that talent isn't nurtured, then it can potentially go to waste, which is sad.
What are some of the things, oh, thank you for sharing about that. What are some of the things that you have done along your path to nurture your skill set?
That's a great question. I think that my goal has always been, and I received some advice pretty early on in my career, is that the first 10 years or so is really about adding as many skills to your toolbox as you possibly can. So I think that if you were to look at my resume or looked at my LinkedIn profile, either now or in the future, because I'm certain that I'm going to be doing something that's still in my wheelhouse in this industry, but perhaps something that maybe is unexpected based on what I've done to this point. That you'll always see me trying to add new experiences to it, and I think that when you apply a certain core group of skills, if you're actively looking for ways to apply those differently, you can come up with some pretty interesting results. So that's something that I've done. I always try to read as much as I can from different sources. I'm a big news junkie. I love to read just in general. I think it's important to understand different viewpoints. I always try to look at, well, what is the core insight behind what this author is trying to say? And I find that really helps me as a speechwriter, because regardless of how technical something might be, I think what my clients are really looking for is like, well, how do I deliver the insight to this audience? So there are multiple different ways that I try to hone my own skill set, but those would be the two, is just applying it as many different ways as I can, and trying to learn from as many different people as I can.
Are you particularly satisfied when you see a well-written piece or a well-crafted message? Does that bring you joy when you're doing your reading? Do you really enjoy the work of others?
Yes, very much so. I really enjoy a message that is well crafted, and what was interesting to me is when I first started the business, I was talking with my dad, and I was saying, wow, this artist really did some great work when they were recording these albums in the 70s and the 80s. I think we were talking about Elton John. And I would just go back and listen over and over. A lot of songwriting, as I've heard it in interviews with different songwriters, is coming up with that core insight. And he asked me, he's like, is that helping you with your work? And I said, yeah, I think it is in a way. And I was really surprised that he came up with that, because I've been so inside my own head trying to figure out, how do I communicate my own value proposition to clients? And it was really the lessons from these songwriters and from different commentators that I'm fond of. It's like, keep it simple, make it an insight that is simply communicated, but something that has a lot of profound meaning and depth. And so that's another balance that I'm always trying to strike when I'm working with clients.
Do you ever turn that off? Or are you always looking at things through that lens? Like, can you look at social media not through the lens of like, what story are they telling here?
Well, some things are just fun, right? I mean, like, what's your favorite meme, for example? Do you have a favorite meme?
Oh my God, there's so many going around right now. There's some very good ones about what phase of, social isolation are you in?
Right. So sometimes it's just fun. I'd like to think that I'm balanced enough to say, well, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But when they are really going for something, like when I'm reading an op-ed piece or listening to a song or even watching a TV show or a film, which is something that I think we're all doing much more of lately, and the story is going along and then they just kind of drop something that was an interesting plot point, or they didn't carry the ball over the finish line in the way that I would have. I'm like, it's not so much disappointment. It's just like, I wonder why they made that choice, because that's also very important too, is understanding why people make the choices that they make, both as content creators and as speakers, and in many other facets of life too.
I was really surprised. I've done some work with songwriters lately. I was really surprised to learn how much of a 3-part story even their 3-minute song is. Some of the more skilled writers have all 3 parts, the act 1, 2, and 3, just like a film.
It's awesome, and it's an amazing talent that I don't pretend to have. I'm just an appreciator.
Yeah.
What was is there a specific song that you can name that was really stood out to you, or is that?
I can't think of a particular song, but it was a theme that kept coming up, and it was actually the place where I borrowed that story from, I believe, was the comparison between battle rappers and actual hip hop artists that record and release their music, because an argument was being made that a battle rapper did not have that, and that a true storytelling song would require all 3 parts. And so there's an actual arc that it has to begin, have the middle, and then the resolution. And it really, particularly with the time constraints, it really surprised me. So I guess any form of writing in any medium will have that need to have basically what you do, the full story, or the content has to sell it. So it was really surprising.
I would never have thought of that before.
Yeah.
Battle rappers versus hip hop recording artists.
Yeah.
I do have to say, there is something fascinating about someone that can just get up there, and again, it looks effortless, but it is a skill that they must have honed over time. Just come up with lyrics on the spot and have it be coherent. That is not a skill set of mine, in case you couldn't tell. It's really something. So I think it must have been so fascinating to see 2 different sides of that same coin, as it were.
Yeah. And I'm decent at rhyming. I just wouldn't call myself a battle rapper, but I can come up with rhymes pretty quickly.
I want to hear some of that after the podcast. That would be really.
You're learning all sorts of things about us in this version, episode, which is your story, not ours.
It's an interesting bonus feature. I think that
there you go.
Put it out.
So do you find any particular challenges at doing what you do at the level that you do?
I think the challenges are, I think the biggest challenge is making sure that my relationship with my clients is built on trust, that they really trust me. And not that I think of myself as untrustworthy, or that I present as untrustworthy, but it takes a while to really understand where they're coming from. So I've worked with clients that insist that their speech is about one thing. And I said, okay, yes, it is on the surface, but what it's really about is this. Like, it's about this promise that you kept to your mentor, that you would carry on his legacy. And you can't just go for that right away, right? Even though it keeps coming up, you have to really listen and say, yeah, it's almost like building a case, right? You have to have evidence for that. It's like, well, you mentioned this thing and how it was a pivotal moment, and that ties back to this key story that you sort of mentioned as just an aside. And then you made the second point about this other pivotal moment in your career, but there's a through line between that moment and the first moment. And I'm seeing a lot that is jumping out at me to say, like, this should be woven into the story somehow. Or sometimes it doesn't even have to be explicitly stated, but it can be a fascinating piece of subtext where even if a client just goes up on stage and she has no mention of what we've determined is the greater insight, even if she doesn't mention it explicitly, the fact that she's delivering it and she's saying to herself, perhaps, like, oh, this was really about keeping the promise to my mentor, who was so great and so impactful, that can change the tone of the speech, even if it's just for her, and therefore change the delivery. So getting to that point requires a lot of work on my end. And so it's not just the conversations, but it's reading excerpts of a book that she has written, or perhaps a whole book, as it were, in one case, watching videos that they had already given, just to observe things like technique. And even though I don't specialize in technique, but observing how they deliver speeches at different moments, or, what was the story behind that particular moment, and why did that succeed or fail. So I have to really do my homework and bring all of myself to that point to make sure that they do trust me. You really have to do the work. So I think it's on two levels. My hope is that they trust me right in the beginning, because I am genuinely interested in what they're saying. But then there's there's the trust that comes from delivering that payoff, delivering that result to them, even before I've started writing, that hopefully he or she will go like, wow, he really does understand it. He really did watch that video. He didn't just skim through it.
And I can imagine there's a sense of relief sometimes. In my career, there's been nothing more frustrating than having something that makes sense in my head. And I get 95% of the way there and explaining it or getting the message across. But then people sit there and listen, and then they say, but really, what is this about? And so it sounds like this is something you're able to provide.
Yeah, I think so. But it's not something that I believe resides uniquely in me or with me. It's really about the collaboration between the client and I.
Sure.
So I would say to any client that is thinking about working with me, or any speechwriter, is that if you're willing to bring a lot to the table on the front end, we will make the process easier and easier for you as we go along. And by the time that you have something that resembles a finished product, you'll be amazed at how well it is written and how well it sounds like you and reflects your viewpoint. So yeah, it takes a while to get there though. And there is a sense of relief on my part, but again, it's not really about me. I'm more relieved when they say to me like, oh yeah, this really makes sense. This is the direction that I want to go, because it is somewhat subjective in nature. Another speechwriter could take that and go a completely different place with it and say, well, we're going to play out this part and we're not even going to mention this at all. Like, put that other aspect out of your head.
Yeah.
It's really about the collaboration and creating a piece of art that is meaningful.
So when you decided to do what you're doing now and really kind of do this as your own consulting business, did you feel like your journey and your path up to that point had really led you to having this skill set needed for this work? Or did you feel like, yes, but there are things that I'm going to have to work on or build to be able to now pivot?
Oh, yes to both. So as you've heard the story of my career, definitely working in consumer insights, I think, has been helpful, and that is an industry that of which I still consider myself a part to this day, even though I have this offshoot in my career doing something that's important to me. I still consider myself to that industry to be my home industry. So working in consumer insights was definitely important. The client relation skills that I developed really in the second half of my career, well, second half to date anyway. I hope it's not the second half totally. And then just the writing part and working with speakers and Toastmasters. I think the thing that I've had to work most on is the business development aspects of being a business person. That is not something that comes naturally to me, and I have developed my own way of doing it. I've worked or I've talked to consultants that say like, well, if you just follow my formula and you reach out to X number of people a day, then you're going to be set and you're going to be swimming in clients. And my reaction is always like, well, but then you lose the individuality, and how can I reproach them and say that I can add value when I don't really understand their point of view yet, or I don't really have an inkling. Like if I just see that they're an author or speaker and I try to approach them without really having done at least a little bit of homework, how does that relationship develop? So I've had to really balance that desire to want to go in deep right away with the realities of scaling and developing a business. And that's a work in progress for sure. So
I'm right there with you. I think we're kindred spirits in that sense. When I first started my practice, everybody was like, you need to have a business plan. You got to map all this out. And I was like, I'm never going to start a business then. That's not me.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? I mean, do you find, I mean, you must, in your, especially you as an actual coach, a real coach, unlike me, what is your process? I mean, like, how do you approach it and really get people to say like, oh wow, she really understands and she really could add insight into what I'm trying to achieve?
I think I'm like you. It's a work in progress, right? On that type of skill set that is needed to be able to have and run your own consulting business or coaching business, right? You know, a lot of us like leaders come into this work because we're good at something or we were passionate about something, and then we have to figure out this other skill set that's the requirement of it.
It's good to hear that someone else has that struggle
Yeah.
in addition to myself. When you are an entrepreneur and you're doing it on your own in particular, you do have this feeling sometimes that like, oh wow, it's just me.
Yes,
I
sure.
alone am terrible at this, and then oh, I've really failed. But then you talk to other people, and it's really enlightening. You say, oh well, here's how I overcame that, and it's like that can make you feel so much better, even if the answer is still or the solution is not immediate or it doesn't work out right away. It can still make you feel really good about moving forward.
That brings me to a question about, are there any successes and failures that stand out, along your journey here to this point?
In this business,
Just across the board, your path to this point.
Well, the big mistake, and I've talked about this on other podcasts and even with clients before, just in the interest of transparency, the big mistake I made early on was that the business name, the Content Interpreter, that was the name because of the intent was to do all written content. So, hey, you need corporate copy, you need ghostwriting, you need something for your website, like I'm your guy. And I really struggled for the first 5 or 6 months. And I think it was because I didn't have a real defined POV. And I did some work for some wonderful clients in that area, in different areas, mostly marketing collateral. And it was really rewarding working with those few clients. But that was only because I think they understood my process better than I did. So I don't know if I would call that a failure. It certainly felt like that at different points within that period, but I found that I wasn't really listening to it wasn't that I wasn't listening to what the clients were saying, but it was like I wasn't listening to what they were not saying, right? So they were really responding well to something that I did. So the fact that I would ask so many questions early on and really make it very consultative in the beginning, and really just me shutting up and listening in the beginning. And as I was trying to find my footing, I was at times not giving that enough care and attention as I should. And it really worked. And so the way that I overcame that was I said, well, what area really would require that the most? What is the most fun and what is the most satisfying kind of work that you could do? And when I started getting speech writing work, I said, oh, of course. And I had done that all along. One of my very first clients was for a speech writing gig for a company, the president of a transportation company that just wanted like a rallying speech for his employees at a town hall. And so the answer was there, like in my first month of business, and I just didn't pay attention to it for whatever reason. And so that has been a real evolution for me. And it wasn't until like 5 or 6 months in that I was like, oh, of course. And then I found that if people did want to work with me in areas outside of speech writing, which is where the presentation consulting aspect of the business came in, it's like, oh, you have that process, just use the same thing and it works just as well. So that is, I guess, a failure that sort of evolved into a success, which I think is, in the long run, that's how you should really look at any failure, but certainly doesn't feel that way in the moment.
Especially when you're beginning a business.
Yeah, it hurts sometimes.
So what would you say you've learned about yourself throughout this journey?
I think that I've learned about myself. That's a really good question. You guys have some great questions, really.
Like you're just, praising us to death here.
No, I've really enjoyed this because you focused on the early years and like you're really connecting all the dots. I can appreciate that as someone that does what I do. What did I learn about myself? I think that I learned that my skill set is valuable in a number of different contexts. Again, early on, I found myself really intimidated by some of my clients because the caliber of what they achieved or their education, their academic successes, whatever it might be. And I used to kind of think to myself, like, well, why? Like I'd be on the phone and I'm like, well, why do you need me? Like I'm just the dumbest guy in the room compared to you. And then I realized that the best thing that you can bring to someone's life into a business relationship is showing that you care genuinely, and that you're trying to understand and that you relate to what they're saying in some way. And so we try to take that chemistry, or I try to take that chemistry and say, how can we infuse it into this talk, this presentation, this speech? And that, I think, is probably the biggest thing that I've learned about myself, that what each of us does, regardless of our station in life, is valuable in ways that cannot always easily be foreseen.
Sure. To your point about getting to work with some people that have accomplished, amazing things, what have you seen, just in interacting with these people, about what maybe could be insights to our listeners about what it takes to get to that place?
That's a good question too. I think that the thing that has always stood out to me is that regardless of how successful you are, with the exception of a select few, and none of my clients, but I'm just saying in general, with the exception of a select few that think they're awesome and the greatest, is that no one really thinks that, like, oh, well, just because I have a PhD and my firm did X million in revenue, greater over last year or whatever it might be, no one really thinks of themselves as like, well, hey, I've made it. And no one successful, I think, really thinks that way. They all look at it as an evolution. So that would be something that I would share. And the other thing that I've learned by working with clients is that they really value this idea of having a collaborator in their corner. And I like the fact that I've been able to kind of change their minds about what a speechwriter really does, if it's going to be an effective final product. Is that if you really huddle up with them and again, show that you care, show that you understand, that there is tremendous value in that. And I didn't realize before I started doing this how many people really are looking for that. And now that's the thing I can't turn off, Lauren, is now I see that everywhere. And so now it's like, oh, okay, like, so how do you meet people's needs in that moment? And that's something that I've really carried over to my own networking, and especially networking with fellow entrepreneurs. Like, well, what can I bring to you? Like, what do you need? And not asking for anything in return, just wanting to genuinely help because you want to see other people succeed. So yeah, it's a real interesting journey that way. So in a way, it's like I learned about myself by learning about others, and it's like this really interesting feedback loop that we're on.
Absolutely. Do you feel like you've had to make any sacrifices throughout?
Uh, in what way? I'm curious about that question.
People look at that word differently, but I don't want to bias your answer. So I'm not going to give you an answer, but is there anything that you feel like you've had to give up or forego or?
I think that I've had to sacrifice the expectation that like, oh, well, we'll all come together at once. I think I really had to respect the process. I have a blog post on my website called Embrace the Process, Enhance Your Speech.
Mm.
And I think I had to sacrifice my expectation that it would just sort of come together right away.
Mm.
And really respect the process. And I think, as any entrepreneur will tell you, that there are financial sacrifices as well as you go into this.
For
But
sure.
if it's worth but if it's worth doing, right, and you really believe in what you're doing, then that is something that is worth it, and the money will come. It'll come into place just later on, because you have to build equity in your own brand. I really believe in that. And again, that's, media and advertising and marketing side of me. I really believe in brand equity and sort of investing in the long term, because no one respects, I don't think, at least someone that does what I do, they wouldn't respect me, I think, if I was a short-term thinker, or made them believe that I was a short-term thinker in any way.
Interesting. What does a typical day look like for you?
Oh, it's different. I think that any entrepreneur will tell you that. Usually I like to get started with the day by just sitting in quiet for a little while with a nice cup of coffee. I prefer it iced, but in these days of social isolation, I just have to settle for my homemade hot coffee, and just really try to center myself and think about, like, well, what are the most important things that I could accomplish today? So almost making like a mental checklist of what I think are the most important things. I think it's really important to tune out a lot of what is noise, especially as an entrepreneur, because people will, and I don't mean to disparage anyone, because we're all just trying to make a living, and I respect that. But people will come to you and they'll believe, I think, in their heart of hearts, that I could really add value to this person, but because they're missing a key component, their pitch might be like, oh, but that's not right for me. And if you're able to go, and I've watched other entrepreneurs do this from a safe position before I was an entrepreneur, so thankfully I learned from this mistake. If you chase after all of those and consider every one of them to be an equal opportunity, it's probably not going to work out very well, and you'll just end up feeling frustrated. I certainly focus on networking, particularly virtually, and these days. And so what I've been doing a lot is just reaching out to speakers and authors and thought leaders, and just saying, I would love to learn learn more about your story. This is what I do. Will you just share with me your story? And the response for that has been really, really high.
No, that's great.
Probably higher than any other way that I've tried to engage with people. And I find that, again, just coming to the table with a genuine interest wins the day. And that's when you can start some interesting conversations, and they'll say, hey, you know what? I know someone that has an event that hasn't been canceled, that, later in the fall, that could really use your help. Like, you guys should at least talk. Or, oh, hey, I think I might know someone that you'd just be interested in talking to. So I think investing in that, in the brand that way, is helpful. And then, of course, producing my own content, so videos, I do a lot of written social media posts, a lot of blog posts, as much as I can do on my own without having a team, because it is just me. Because I feel like it would be weird to have a business called the Content Interpreter, and then you go to my website,
You're not producing your content.
no content, there's no
Or
podcast,
nothing. Yeah.
So right now, one of the things I'm really proud of is that if you go to my website, there's a lot of goodies on there for people to hopefully enjoy and engage with.
So what advice would you give an aspiring performer in your field or person?
Former.
Sorry,
that is.
We refer to performers as in like high performers. Sorry.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, so not as a public speaker. I was saying, I should get one of my public speaking coach partners on the phone, and she could probably better answer that. For high performers, I think that there's this idea, like I said before, the idea that like saying yes will somehow get you in front of more opportunities. I think really it's about having that balance of like, well, what is most important to me? One of the pieces of advice that I've heard given for this time that we're living in, and I presume by the time this airs that we'll still be practicing social distancing, which is the absolute right thing to do. But one of the things that I've heard is that, there was something on social media the other day, like, well, if you didn't learn a language, or if you didn't have your side hustle fully developed by the time you get out of this, then you just didn't have the discipline to begin with. And it's like, really? Like, is that really helpful? Like, if you're not doing something, I think it's more helpful to look inward and say, like, well, why doesn't that not connect with me? Like, why do I always have the best of intentions to do something and then I never do it? I think that the most important things in my life sometimes are the things that I didn't do because it just didn't feel right. So that would be one piece of advice I'd have for high performers. The second one is that it's just like what I've learned with my clients. It's really important to come to the table with genuine interest in another person, and I think that's a quality that is sadly not in as high a quantity as we would like these days. I think that if you genuinely show interest and you genuinely want to add value, that people are surprised by that. It shouldn't be that way, but that they're surprised. And I think that those two things really are a couple of things that you can employ on the road to being a high performer. I consider myself still on that road myself. So I try to learn as much as I can from what has worked and what hasn't in my own journey.
Thank you. So is there anything that we haven't asked that you feel is important to share?
Oh, wow. Someone asked me that on a podcast once. And I think I said something about like, I would love to interview Oprah. So I'll just put that out there. That I'd really like to meet Oprah because I think she's fascinating. But I think that hopefully, what the goal, I think one of the goals of this podcast is, and what I think is so great about what you guys are doing is that people will have their own question in mind after listening to this conversation, and hopefully they'll have something they want to fill in, and then they'll reach out to you when this airs. And my advice for that would just be open and receptive to it, and respect your audience, which I know you will, because it's clear from the way that you presented yourself. So that would be the thing that I would probably add, is that this podcast, I think, is really an interesting springboard for ongoing discussions. And hopefully the episodes, they're capsules, they're snapshots in time, but that they could go on, and if someone's listening to this a year from now, that it might inspire them to fill in the blank themselves.
Well, thank you. And I know, Lauren, I'll be remiss if I don't ask this question, because she had alluded to it earlier. If you could, would you be able to put a number to the percentage of success that you feel is natural versus the working hard? Like if you had to create the ratio.
Oh, the nature versus nurture, like how much of it is
Yeah.
talent, how much of it is hard work. Oh, I'd say at least 90 for hard work.
Hmm.
Because then it just sits there and you're not doing anything with it. It's like, well, is a hammer, and I'm not a guy that is handy at all. So this is a weird thing for me to be saying. It gives a totally false impression. But if a hammer is just sitting there in the toolbox, like,
It's useless.
yeah, it's a good hammer, but we don't know
Hmm.
the houses that it could build or something. See, that analogy, it sounds unnatural with me saying that. I don't even know why I thought
like
of a hammer.
But it was great. It
Just,
was perfect.
but
I'm
I
going
think
to
it's
steal
true.
that, actually. I will credit you, but I'm going to steal that analogy.
Okay, all right. I didn't know it was worthy of stealing, but it is.
And Lauren, do you want to do the last one?
Yeah. So, I mean, this has been awesome, and it's been great to hear your story and your thoughts on a lot of different things.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it myself, so thank you.
What do you think is the biggest takeaway from your story?
The biggest takeaway is that, and I've read different columnists' opinions on this, and so I'm going to kind of fold that into my own story. The biggest takeaway is that one's career does not have to be linear, that you can try different things, that you can, not this is my primary goal ever, but that you can monetize different aspects of your skill set in a way that you never thought possible. I think the goal that I hope to see in myself as I continue, but also in my clients, is this idea that you're coachable, that to some degree you're still malleable, and that you're still willing to try new things. I think that is something that you can take away, and that it's never a bad thing to have different experiences, that none of those experiences are wasted, even if they don't work out quite the way that you want them to.
That's awesome.
Thank you. And I understand you have some information you'd like to potentially share with our listeners.
Yes, thank you so much. And I alluded to it a little earlier because there's a lot of goodies on my website. It's contentinterpreter.com. That's the website that you visit. And if you go specifically to contentinterpreter.com/free-guide, there is a video guide series. You sign up with your email and you receive 1 2 to 3 minute video from me each day. There are 3 of them, part 1, 2, and 3, that reveals a little bit more about the specifics of my process. And if you're writing your own speech, what are the things that you should be thinking about? How to tell if you're ready to give that speech. That's covered in the 3rd and final part of the series. And I worked with a fabulous public speaking coach that I've just come to adore over the last 12 to 18 months or so that I've known her, and she and I worked together on those. And I just think that she did a fabulous job producing them, and I think there's some really great content in there too. So please come on over to my website. That's contentinterpreter.com/free-guide, and you can sign up with your email, and you'll get to hear me talk even more than you've already heard me on this episode, which is a treat, I hope.
Well, thanks, JT. That's awesome. And we'll provide, the link and information for everybody on the show notes as well.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on. This was a really fascinating conversation.
For us as well. Thank you so much.
The Path Distilled is hosted by Kevin Harris and Lauren Tashman, created and produced by Kevin Harris. The content is copyrighted by The Path Distilled, all rights reserved.